The crack of leather against wood splintered the heavy summer air as Josephine Foster's heart stopped in her chest. Her father's rage exploding like thunder across their modest homestead just outside of Cottonwood Springs, Wyoming Territory, 1878. The belt that had been aimed for her back was now suspended in midair, its leather strap severed clean through by the quick draw and steady hand of Zachary Xavier, a ranch hand who'd appeared in the doorway like an avenging angel, his eyes hard as flint and his voice steady as stone when he drawled. "That'll be the last time you raise a hand to her, mister." Foster, Josephine stood frozen, her back pressed against the rough-hewn wall of the cabin, the fresh welts from her father's earlier strikes burning beneath her simple cotton dress. At 20 years old, she'd endured her father's violent tempers since her mother's death 6 years prior, but never before had anyone intervened. "This ain't your business, cowboy," Edwin Foster snarled, his breath heavy with whiskey and his face mottled red with fury. "Get off my property before I put a bullet between your eyes." "Miss Foster's coming with me," Zachary replied, his 6-foot frame filling the doorway, one hand resting casually on his holstered Colt, the other extended toward Josephine. "And if you try to stop us, mister Foster, we'll see who's faster on the draw." Josephine's gaze darted between her father and the cowboy. Zachary Xavier had been working at the neighboring Rockingham Ranch for just 3 months. They'd exchanged no more than pleasantries when she'd delivered eggs or passed him on the dusty road to town, yet here he stood, risking his life for her. "Josephine," her father barked, "you step out that door, don't you ever think about coming back." The threat hung in the air, but rather than the usual fear, Josephine felt something unfamiliar blossoming in her chest hope. With shaking hands, she gathered her shawl from the hook by the door and moved toward Zachary, whose eyes never left her father. "I won't be needing to come back," she whispered, her voice finding strength with each word. Zachary backed out slowly, his hand guiding Josephine behind him. His horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, stood waiting, already saddled as if he'd known exactly what he was riding into. "Can you ride?" he asked quietly. "Since I could walk," she answered, and with practiced ease he lifted her onto the saddle before mounting behind her. As they rode away from the only home she'd ever known, Josephine didn't look back. The sensation of Zachary's solid chest against her back and the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them seemed to wash away years of fear and pain with each hoofbeat. "Why?" she finally asked as the cabin disappeared behind the rolling hills of the Wyoming prairie. "No man should ever raise a hand to a woman," he replied, his voice rough with conviction. "I've seen the marks on your arms when you come to town, been watching your father's place for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He paused. "I'm sorry it took me so long." Tears welled in Josephine's eyes, but she blinked them away. "Where are we going?" "First, to get those wounds tended to, then to the Rockingham. The foreman's wife, Mrs. Holloway, she's a good woman. She'll give you shelter until you decide what you want to do." As they rode toward the setting sun, Josephine felt the impossible weight she'd carried for years beginning to lift. For the first time in her memory, she was riding toward something, not running from someone. The Rockingham Ranch sprawled across the valley like a kingdom unto itself. Nestled between the shadow of the mountains and the meandering Snake River, its buildings stood solid against the harsh Wyoming elements. As they approached, lanterns were being lit against the gathering dusk, their warm glow a beacon of welcome. Clara Holloway met them at the door of the main house, her weathered face creasing with concern as she took in Josephine's battered appearance. "Lord have mercy," she murmured, ushering them inside. "Zachary Xavier, what trouble have you brought to my doorstep now?" "The kind that needed bringing, Mrs. Holloway," Zachary answered, removing his hat as he stepped into the warm kitchen. "Miss Foster needs a place to stay." Clara's sharp eyes took in the situation with one sweeping glance. "Edwin Foster's girl, I've heard whispers." She turned to Josephine with gentle hands. "Come, child, let's tend to those wounds and get you settled." In a small room off the kitchen, Clara helped Josephine out of her dress, her practiced hands cleaning and applying salve to the angry welts across her back. "These will heal," she said softly, "but the ones inside take longer." Her eyes met Josephine's in the mirror. Zachary's a good man, headstrong and too quick to act sometimes, but his heart's in the right place. I hardly know him, Josephine admitted. Why would he risk himself for me? Clara's laugh was warm and knowing. That boy's been watching you since his first day here, said you had the saddest eyes he'd ever seen and the straightest spine despite it. She wrapped clean bandages around Josephine's torso. Some men see a pretty face and stop looking. Others see straight to the soul. Zachary's the second kind. Later, dressed in a borrowed nightgown and wrapped in a quilt, Josephine sat at the Holloway's kitchen table, a steaming cup of tea warming her hands. Zachary entered, his tall frame seeming to diminish the size of the room. He'd washed up, his dark hair still damp, his face clean-shaven. "Mrs. Holloway says you can stay as long as you need," he said, settling across from her. "Mr. Holloway's already ridden to town to let the sheriff know what happened. Your father won't be troubling you." "Thank you seems inadequate," Josephine said, meeting his gaze. His eyes were the color of the Wyoming sky at dusk, neither fully blue nor gray, but something in between, flecked with gold. "I don't understand why you would help me." "Some things a man just knows he has to do," Zachary replied, his voice low. "I've been on my own since I was 16. Seen plenty of cruelty and good people who looked the other way, swore I'd never be that person." He hesitated. "Besides, I've been wanting to make your acquaintance proper-like for some time now." A smile touched Josephine's lips for what felt like the first time in years. "Well, Mr. Xavier, I believe you've found quite the extraordinary way to introduce yourself." The next morning, Josephine woke to the unfamiliar sound of laughter and the clatter of dishes. For a moment, disoriented, she thought she was back in the time before her mother died, when their home had been filled with warmth instead of fear. Then reality returned along with the dull ache across her back, but instead of dread, she felt a cautious optimism. In the kitchen, she found Clara preparing breakfast for the ranch hands. The older woman smiled warmly. "Good morning, dear. How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," Josephine answered truthfully. "Well, there's coffee on the stove and biscuits in the oven. The men will be in soon." Clara paused in her work, studying Josephine. "Mr. Holloway and I talked it over. If you're willing, we could use help with the cooking and housekeeping. It's honest work and you'd have your own room in the house." Tears of gratitude sprang to Josephine's eyes. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Holloway. I'm a hard worker." "I've no doubt of that, child." Clara patted her hand. "And please, call me Clara." The days that followed took on a rhythm that soothed Josephine's wounded spirit. She rose with the sun to help Clara prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, learning the running of a household far larger than she'd ever managed. In the afternoons, she helped with the mending, gardening, and preserving, her capable hands finding purpose in the work. Zachary kept a respectful distance, but his presence was a constant. She'd catch him watching her from across the yard, or feel his steadying hand at her elbow when she carried heavy loads. Each small gesture cemented her growing certainty that he was unlike any man she'd ever known. A week after her arrival, Zachary found her in the garden, gathering vegetables for supper. He approached with his hat in his hands, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Miss Foster," he began, "I was wondering if you might accompany me to town tomorrow. Mrs. Holloway needs supplies, and I thought you might like to get some things of your own." Josephine straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. The thought of going to town, where everyone would know what had happened, filled her with trepidation. "I'm not sure that's wise." Your father's been warned by Sheriff Taylor to stay away from you," Zachary assured her. "And you'd be with me. I wouldn't let any harm come to you." The conviction in his voice made her heart quicken. "Then yes, Mr. Xavier, I'd be pleased to accompany you." The next morning, they set out in the ranch wagon, the summer sun warming the air as they traveled the familiar road to Cottonwood Springs. Zachary handled the team with easy confidence, keeping up a steady stream of conversation that helped calm Josephine's nerves. "I've been meaning to ask," he said as they approached the outskirts of town, "what would you like to be called?" "Mrs. Holloway calls you Josephine, but the hands all say Miss Foster." She considered the question. "My mother called me Josie," she admitted. "No one's called me that since she died." Zachary nodded. "Josie," he repeated, as if testing the name. It suits you. The simple observation brought a flush to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. Cottonwood Springs was busier than usual, the monthly supply train having arrived the previous day. As Zachary helped Josephine down from the wagon, heads turned and whispers followed. She held her chin high, grateful for the new dress Clara had altered for her and the steady presence of Zachary at her side. Their first stop was Harrington's general store, where Mrs. Harrington greeted Josephine with a warm embrace that startled her. "Child, I've been worried sick about you," the older woman said, holding Josephine at arm's length to examine her. "Clara sent word that you're staying at the Rockingham. Thank the Lord someone finally stepped in." Zachary moved discreetly away to give them privacy, but his watchful gaze remained on Josephine as she and Mrs. Harrington spoke in hushed tones. "Your father's been in a foul mood all week," Mrs. Harrington confided. "Been drinking heavily at O'Malley's. You be careful, dear." "I will," Josephine promised, her resolve strengthening. She would not allow fear to dictate her life any longer. As they collected the supplies on Clara's list, Zachary added small items he thought might please Josephine: a ribbon for her hair, a small bottle of rose-scented soap, a journal with clean pages. When she protested the expense, he simply smiled and said, "Consider it a welcome to your new life." They were loading the last of their purchases when a commotion erupted down the street. The unmistakable figure of Edwin Foster stumbled from the saloon, his face contorted with drunken rage as he caught sight of Josephine. "There's the ungrateful whore," he bellowed, lurching forward. "Think you can humiliate me and get away with it?" Zachary stepped smoothly between them, his hand resting on his holster. "Go back inside, Mr. Foster. You're drunk and making a fool of yourself." Several townspeople had stopped to watch, their faces showing a mixture of concern and morbid curiosity. Sheriff Taylor emerged from his office, moving purposefully toward the confrontation. "You stole my daughter, you bastard," Edwin slurred, swaying on his feet. "She's my property." "I'm not property," Josephine said clearly, stepping up beside Zachary, her voice carried across the suddenly silent street. "I'm a woman who deserves better than to be beaten for your failures." Her father's face darkened dangerously. "Why, you little," he lunged forward, reaching for her. In one fluid motion, Zachary drew his revolver and cocked it. "Not another step, Foster." Sheriff Taylor arrived, his weathered face grim. "That's enough, Edwin. I warned you to stay away from the girl. She's my daughter." "And she's of age to make her own choices," the sheriff countered. "Now you can either walk back to the saloon under your own power, or I can drag you to a cell to sober up. Your choice." For a tense moment, Josephine thought her father might challenge the sheriff, but finally, with a venomous glare in her direction, he turned and staggered back toward the saloon. "You all right, Miss Foster?" Sheriff Taylor asked, his kind eyes assessing her. "Yes, thank you, Sheriff." She took a steadying breath. "I appreciate your intervention." "Don't you worry about him," the lawman assured her. "Most folks in town have known about his temper for years." "Should have stepped in sooner, I reckon." He tipped his hat to them both. "Xavier, you take good care of this young lady." As they drove back to the ranch, Josephine was quiet, processing the confrontation. Finally, she turned to Zachary. "Thank you for standing by me." "Always will," he replied simply, as if making a vow. The summer days lengthened, and then began to shorten as August turned to September. Josephine found herself blooming under the care of the Holloway household and the tentative courtship of Zachary Xavier. He was unlike any suitor she might have imagined for herself, patient in his attentions, respectful of her boundaries, and utterly steadfast in his devotion. They began taking evening walks around the ranch, their conversations ranging from childhood memories to dreams for the future. Zachary spoke of his desire to have his own piece of land someday, a modest ranch where he could raise horses and cattle. "I've been saving every penny," he told her one evening as they watched the sunset paint the distant mountains in hues of gold and purple. "Another year or two, I might have enough for a small place." Josephine, sitting beside him on a fallen log, felt a flutter in her chest at the implicit invitation in his words. "That sounds like a wonderful dream. Better with someone to share it," he said softly, his eyes meeting hers. Their first kiss came naturally, as inevitable as the changing seasons. His lips were gentle against hers, his calloused hands cradling her face as if she were made of porcelain. When they parted, her breath came quick and shallow, her heart racing like a wild horse across open plains. "I'm falling in love with you, Josie Foster," Zachary whispered against her hair. "I think I fell the moment you cut my father's belt in two," she confessed, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. The Holloway Ranch became a haven where Josephine learned to trust again, to laugh freely, and to envision a future bright with possibility. She proved herself invaluable to Clara, whose arthritic hands were grateful for the assistance, and she slowly won the respect of the ranch hands with her quiet competence and kind heart. October brought the first hints of winter, the nights growing crisp enough to require fires in the hearths. It also brought unexpected news from town. Sheriff Taylor rode out to the Rockingham one afternoon, his expression grave as he asked to speak with Mr. Holloway and Zachary privately. Josephine watched from the kitchen window as the three men conversed in the yard, tension evident in their postures. When Zachary finally returned to the house, his face was troubled. "What is it?" she asked, dread pooling in her stomach. He took her hands in his. "Your father's been making threats against you in town, claims I kidnapped you and turned you against him." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Sheriff Taylor's concerned. He says Edwin's gathered a few unsavory characters around him, men passing through who don't know the situation." Cold fear trickled down Josephine's spine. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we need to be careful." Zachary's eyes hardened with determination. "Mr. Holloway's increasing the night watch around the ranch, just to be safe." That night, lying in her bed, Josephine stared at the ceiling, haunted by the knowledge that her father's malice reached beyond their homestead. She had hoped that time and distance would diminish his rage, but it seemed to have only fed it. In the pre-dawn hours, she was startled awake by the sound of horses approaching at speed. Before she could rise, shouting erupted outside, followed by the crack of gunfire. Heart-pounding, she threw on her robe and rushed to the window in time to see several mounted figures retreating into the darkness, pursued by Rockingham Ranch hands. Zachary appeared at her door moments later, his expression fierce. "Stay inside," he ordered. "Your father and his friends tried to rustle some of our stock. They're gone now, but they might come back." "Was anyone hurt?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No, but it was close." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Mr. Holloway's sending for the sheriff at first light." The failed rustling attempt marked the beginning of a campaign of harassment against the Rockingham. Fences were cut, a haystack was set ablaze, and twice more riders were spotted near the herds at night. Each incident left Josephine more shaken, guilt gnawing at her for bringing this trouble to the people who had shown her such kindness. "This isn't your fault," Zachary insisted when he found her crying in the garden after the latest incident. He gathered her into his arms, her tears dampening his shirt. "Your father's a troubled man, Josie. His choices are his own. But he's doing this because of me," she whispered. "What if someone gets hurt? I couldn't bear it." Zachary tilted her face up to meet his gaze. "Listen to me. We're going to get through this. Sheriff Taylor's organizing a posse to bring your father in. He's broken the law and he'll answer for it." But Edwin Foster proved elusive. When the sheriff's men rode out to the Foster homestead, they found it abandoned, with evidence that Edwin had fled with his cohorts into the vast wilderness that surrounded Cottonwood Springs. The weeks that followed were tense with waiting. November arrived with bitter winds and the first snowfall, blanketing the ranch in white silence. The harsh weather brought a respite from the troubles, as even Edwin Foster wouldn't risk travel in such conditions. On a clear, cold evening with the ranch peaceful under its winter mantle, Zachary asked Josephine to join him for a walk despite the chill. Bundled in warm cloaks, they made their way to a small rise overlooking the main house, the windows glowing with lamplight below them. "I've been thinking," Zachary said, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air, "about the future." Josephine's heart quickened. "Have you?" He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life." He swallowed hard. I love you, Josie. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me. Tears welled in her eyes, freezing on her lashes. Are you asking what I think you're asking? With a smile that warmed her more than any fire could, he knelt in the snow before her. Josephine Foster, will you marry me? Yes, she breathed without hesitation. Yes, Zachary Xavier, I will. He rose to claim her lips in a kiss that seemed to stop time, the cold forgotten in the warmth of their embrace. When they finally pulled apart, he reached into his pocket and produced a simple gold band. It was my mother's, he explained as he slid it onto her finger. She told me to give it to a woman of courage and heart. That's you, Josie. Their engagement brought joy to the Holloway household. Clara immediately began planning a wedding feast, and Mr. Holloway offered to give the bride away. Even the ranch hands joined in the celebration, presenting the couple with a handmade quilt they'd commissioned from the quilting circle in town. Spring wedding, Clara suggested over dinner. The apple blossoms would make a beautiful backdrop. But Zachary and Josephine exchanged a look of shared understanding. I think Christmas, Josephine said softly, if that's not too soon. Clara's eyebrows rose, but she nodded with a knowing smile. Christmas it is, then. We'll make it a proper celebration. As preparations for the wedding began, the specter of Edwin Foster receded somewhat from their thoughts. There had been no sign of him since the first heavy snowfall, and some in town speculated that he and his companions might have moved on to more hospitable territory for the winter. Josephine threw herself into creating her wedding dress, using fabric Clara had ordered specially from Cheyenne. In the evenings, she and Zachary would sit by the fire, making plans for their future together. He'd been offered a permanent position as foreman of the rocking Mtkes northern pastures, which came with use of a small cabin a mile from the main house, the perfect start for a newly married couple. 2 weeks before Christmas, a heavy blizzard descended on Wyoming Territory, isolating the ranch for days. When the skies finally cleared, Zachary and several hands rode out to check on the cattle in the sheltered valleys where they wintered. They returned with grim news. A significant number of cattle were missing from the southern pasture, and fresh tracks in the new snow led toward the mountains. Your father? Mr. Holloway asked gravely. Zachary nodded. Looks like he waited out the storm and struck when he knew we'd be occupied elsewhere. Must have helped they drove off at least 30 head. The loss was substantial, but what disturbed them more was the boldness of the theft. It meant Edwin Foster was still in the area and growing more desperate or more vengeful. We need to go after them, Zachary insisted. Those tracks are fresh, Mr. Holloway shook his head. There's another storm coming. You can see it building in the west. Anyone who goes into those mountains now might not come back out. Reluctantly, Zachary conceded the wisdom of this, though Josephine could see the frustration in the set of his jaw and the tension in his shoulders. That night, as they sat alone in the parlor after the others had retired, Josephine took Zachary's hand. I know you're worried about what my father might do next. I won't let him hurt you again, Zachary vowed, his voice low with conviction. It's not me I'm worried about, she admitted. He hates you for taking me away. I'm afraid of what he might do to get revenge. Zachary gathered her into his arms. We're getting married in 2 weeks, Josie. After that, we'll make a fresh start away from all this if necessary. He kissed her forehead. I promise you, your father can't touch what we have. The predicted storm arrived the next day, closing them in once more. 3 days later, when it finally passed, Zachary and Mr. Holloway rode to town to speak with Sheriff Taylor about the stolen cattle and to file the marriage papers with the county clerk. They returned with news that sent a chill through Josephine's heart. Edwin Foster had been seen in town the day before, buying supplies and boasting drunkenly that he had unfinished business at the Rocking M. Sheriff Taylor's gathering men to ride out tomorrow, Zachary told her, but with this weather, it might take them a day or more to get here. That night, Mr. Holloway doubled the watch around the ranch, positioning men at various points with instructions to fire a warning shot if they spotted anything suspicious. Zachary insisted that Josephine sleep in the room furthest from any windows or doors, with Clara keeping her company. Neither woman slept much, listening to the wind howling outside and the occasional movement of the men patrolling the property. Near dawn, just as Josephine was drifting into an exhausted doze, a shot rang out, followed by shouting and the sound of horses. She and Clara rushed to the window in time to see flames erupting from the barn, orange and vicious against the pre-dawn darkness. Men were running toward the fire, while others fired at retreating shadows on horseback. "Stay here," Clara ordered, grabbing her shawl. "I need to help with the injured." Josephine watched in horror as the barn fire spread quickly, threatening to reach the nearby corral where horses whinnied in panic. Through the chaos, she spotted Zachary leading a team of men with buckets and blankets, fighting desperately to contain the blaze. Then movement at the edge of her vision caught her attention. A figure was slipping around the side of the house, keeping to the shadows, a rifle in his hands. Even in the dim light, she recognized her father's hulking frame. Heart in her throat, Josephine realized he was positioning himself for a clear shot at Zachary, whose back was turned as he battled the fire. Without thinking, she grabbed a heavy candlestick from the bedside table and rushed from the room. The kitchen door was closest to where she'd spotted her father. Quietly, she slipped outside, the freezing air burning her lungs as she moved along the wall of the house. Edwin Foster stood 20 yards away, rifle raised, taking aim at the man she loved. "Father." She called out, her voice carrying in the still morning air. He whirled, his face a mask of hatred in the reflected firelight. "Come to watch your cowboy die, Josephine? This has to stop," she pleaded, moving slowly closer, the candlestick hidden in the folds of her nightdress. "Haven't you caused enough pain?" "Pain," he spat. "You want to talk about pain? You betrayed me, girl, left me alone after all I did for you." "All you did," disbelief colored her voice. "You beat me, father, for years. You made my life a living hell." He sneered, raising the rifle to point at her. "You're just like your mother, weak, ungrateful." In that moment, Josephine saw him clearly for perhaps the first time, a broken, bitter man consumed by his own demons. "I'm nothing like mother," she said steadily. "She stayed, enduring your cruelty until it killed her. I chose to live." With a roar of rage, Edwin lurched toward her, but Josephine was ready. She swung the heavy brass candlestick with all her strength, catching him across the temple. He staggered, dropping the rifle as he fell to one knee. "Josie!" Zachary's voice cut through the air as he ran toward them, his face streaked with soot, a revolver in his hand. Edwin, dazed but not unconscious, reached for the fallen rifle. Without hesitation, Zachary fired, the bullet kicking up dirt inches from Edwin's hand. "It's over, Foster," he said, his voice like steel as he kept the revolver trained on the older man. "Sheriff Taylor's on his way. You've rustled cattle, committed arson, and attempted murder. You'll hang for this." 2 ranch hands appeared, quickly disarming Edwin and binding his hands. As they hauled him to his feet, he fixed Josephine with a look of pure hatred. "You're dead to me," he snarled. "You hear me? Dead." Josephine straightened her spine, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I've been dead to you for years, father. The difference is now I'm alive for myself." As they led him away, Zachary gathered Josephine into his arms, his heart pounding against her cheek. "That was the bravest and most foolish thing I've ever seen," he murmured into her hair. "Don't ever scare me like that again." "He was going to kill you," she said simply. "I couldn't let that happen." By the time Sheriff Taylor arrived with his posse, the barn fire had been contained, though the structure was a total loss. Miraculously, no one had been seriously injured and all the horses had been saved. Edwin Foster and his 2 companions were taken into custody, charged with multiple crimes that would see them imprisoned for many years, if not hanged. As the sheriff's party departed with their prisoners, Josephine felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, the shadow of her father's violence finally receding. In the aftermath of the attack, the Rocking M community pulled together with remarkable resilience. Neighboring ranchers, hearing of their plight, arrived with lumber and supplies to help rebuild the barn. The work provided a welcome distraction as Christmas approached, and with it, Josephine and Zachary's wedding day. Clara proved herself a magician at transforming tragedy into celebration. The main house was decorated with evergreen boughs and red berries, candles glowing in every window. The new dress Josephine had been sewing was miraculously unharmed, and on Christmas Eve morning, Clara helped her prepare for her new life. "You look beautiful, child," the older woman said, fastening the last button on the ivory dress. "Like an angel." Josephine studied her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her bore little resemblance to the frightened girl who had arrived at the Rockingham 6 months earlier. Her eyes were clear and bright, her posture confident, her smile genuine. "I never thought I could be this happy," she confessed. Clara squeezed her shoulders. "You deserve every bit of it and more." She placed a crown of winter holly on Josephine's head. "Now, let's not keep that handsome cowboy of yours waiting." The ceremony took place in the Holloway parlor, transformed by candlelight and flowers into a space of warmth and intimacy. Judge Patterson had ridden out from town to officiate, and the ranch hands stood in respectful silence as Josephine walked toward Zachary on Mr. Holloway's arm. Zachary's face when he saw her was a picture Josephine knew she would carry in her heart forever: awe, love, and absolute certainty shining in his eyes. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises of love and faithfulness exchanged before those who had become their family. When Judge Patterson pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up nearly raised the roof. The celebration lasted well into the night, with food and music and dancing. As darkness fell and snow began to drift down outside the windows, Zachary led his bride to the small cabin that would be their home. He carried her across the threshold with reverent care, setting her down in the center of the main room where a fire blazed in the hearth. The cabin was modest but lovingly prepared, with curtains Clara had sewn and furniture the ranch hands had built as wedding gifts. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier," Zachary said softly, cupping her face in his hands. Josephine smiled up at him, her heart so full it might burst. "Home," she repeated. "I've waited all my life to know what that truly means." "It means this," he said, gathering her close. "You and me building something together, it means never having to be afraid again." As their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, Josephine knew that what they had found in each other was rarer and more precious than gold, a love forged in the crucible of adversity, strong enough to weather any storm. Spring came early that year, transforming the Wyoming landscape with a riot of wildflowers and new green growth. The Rockingham flourished under Mr. Holloway's guidance and Zachary's capable management. The new barn stood sturdy and strong, a testament to community and resilience. Josephine had found her place as well, not only as Zachary's wife, but as a respected member of the ranch community. She started a small school for the children of the ranch hands, teaching reading and writing in the afternoons. In the mornings, she tended her vegetable garden and the small flock of chickens that provided eggs for their table. Word came from town that Edwin Foster had been sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison for his crimes. The news brought Josephine not joy, but a quiet sense of closure. Her father would no longer cast a shadow over her life. On a warm evening in May, as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, Zachary noticed Josephine's hand resting protectively over her abdomen. "Josie," he asked, his voice catching, "are you?" She turned to him with radiant eyes. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Zach, in the fall." His whoop of joy startled a nearby flock of birds into flight. Lifting her into his arms, he spun her in a circle, both of them laughing with the pure happiness of the moment. "A baby," he repeated in wonder, setting her gently back on her feet. "Our baby. Our family," she corrected, leaning into his embrace, something neither of us really had before. As twilight deepened around them, they spoke of names and plans, of hopes for their child's future. Josephine thought of the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a place of fear and pain to one of love and possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best ones," she replied. "If my father hadn't raised his belt that day, if you hadn't been there to stop him." "I believe we would have found each other anyway," Zachary said with conviction. "Some things are just meant to be." In September, with the aspen trees turning gold on the hillsides, their daughter was born after a difficult but ultimately triumphant labor. They named her Elizabeth Clara Xavier in honor of both their mothers. Cradling her newborn daughter in her arms, with Zachary seated beside her on the bed, his face awestruck as he counted tiny fingers and toes, Josephine felt a sense of completion that she had never imagined possible. "She's perfect," Zachary whispered, gently stroking the baby's downy head. "Just like her mother." Josephine smiled, exhausted but blissfully happy. "She's the best of both of us, and she'll never know what it's like to be afraid in her own home." "No," Zachary agreed firmly. "She'll know only love and safety and the freedom to become whoever she's meant to be." The years that followed brought changes and challenges, joys and sorrows, as all lives do. 2 years after Elizabeth's birth, Josephine gave birth to twin boys, James and William. The Xavier family outgrew their small cabin, and with the blessing and financial backing of Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, Zachary was able to purchase a modest ranch adjacent to the Rocking M. They named it the Broken Belt Ranch, a reminder of the moment that had changed both their lives forever. Under their careful stewardship, it thrived, becoming known throughout the territory for its fine horses and hospitable owners. Josephine never saw her father again. He died in prison 5 years into his sentence, a fact she acknowledged with neither celebration nor mourning, but with a quiet prayer that he had found peace at last. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary presented Josephine with a small leather-bound book in which he had written their story, beginning with the day he had cut her father's belt in two and continuing through the birth of their children and the building of their ranch. "So our children will know," he explained as she turned the pages with wonder, "how brave their mother was and how much we fought for the life we have. How much we love each other," Josephine added softly, leaning into his embrace. "That's what I want them to remember most." That night, with their children sleeping soundly down the hall, they stood together on the porch of the home they had built, gazing up at the vast Wyoming sky ablaze with stars. Zachary's arm around her waist was as strong and steady as it had been the day he had lifted her onto his horse and carried her away from danger. "Any regrets?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Josephine thought of the frightened young woman she had been, and the journey that had brought her here to this man, these children, this life filled with purpose and love. "Not a single one," she answered, turning in his arms to meet his lips with her own, sealing once more the promise they had made to each other long ago to choose love over fear, hope over despair, and each other above all else. In the years that followed, their legend grew throughout Wyoming Territory, the story of a brave young woman and the cowboy who broke her father's belt, took her away, and in doing so, gave her the greatest gift of all: the freedom to love and be loved completely and without reservation for all the days of their lives.